Hello there. Today we're going to do a quick review of the new AMD Radeon RX 6800 XT, the new high-end GPU by AMD. It's been a really complicated situation with the GPU market and things not being available. As you know, the prices haven't been too bad here in Spain, where I live. A few friends and I have been able to get them on launch day, and we only had to wait about a week for the arrival. Here's the card. As you can see, it is pretty big. It's like 2.5 slots in width. It's much bigger than what I had before, which was the Radeon VII. The backplate is pretty cool as well, and it has dual 8 pins, as most of the high-end cards do. Triple fans, pretty big this time, which is nice. And what we're going to do is take this guy and compare it to the card that I used to have before, which I reviewed last year, the Radeon VII. Both have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. This one has more shaders because it has 72 compute units. It's the middle brother of the Navi 21 cards. We have the 6800 at 60 CUs and the 6900 XT at 80. I think this one and the 6800 are the ones that you should get if you want a high-end GPU right now, because of the VRAM amount. As many games, as we will see in a bit, are pushing VRAM capacity, and also the performance itself is really good. Here's the box that it came in. The card is actually very heavy. It's 1.5 kilograms, so it's even thicker and heavier than the Radeon VII. It's the Sapphire model, but all of them are the same. Price here in Spain was 670 euros, which is roughly just a bit more, according to taxes, than the $650 US that it sells for as MSRP. So we're going to look at a few games. I'm going to be adding graphs or numbers or whatever on screen. The first game that we have here is Devil May Cry 5, and I tested it. I tested all the games in several different APIs. I did a lot of DX11 tests, some DX12, and some Vulkan. So for Devil May Cry, I did a test on Mission 7, walking for 3 minutes and fighting. I did it on DX11 and DX12, 1440p and 4K. So starting with DX11 at 1440p, the Radeon VII, which is not stock, by the way. I don't have it anymore in hand, as I gave it to, I sold it to a friend. He's having fun with it. So it isn't exactly stock. I undervolted it. I took the voltage down to 1 volt, 1000 millivolts. And then I pushed the memory to 1200 megahertz for a total of 1.2 terabytes of bandwidth. And so it got 172.7 FPS. 1440p Ultra, so which is a lot already, and the 6800 XT got 242.1, so that's ridiculous. And then again, the X11 at 4K, it got 95 frames, the Radeon VII, which is fantastic, but the 6800 XT got 126.9, which is ridiculous. Then at 4K, at DX12, the Radeon VII got 158 at 1440, and the 6800 got 226.9. And then at 4K, they got 83.9 and 131.9 respectively. So as you can see, both are having fantastic performance, but the leg up that it's going to have in some games is going to get larger. Then we have, for example, I have Monster Hunter World with the Radeon VII undervolted. On the X11, it got 71 FPS at 1440p and 37 FPS at 4K. Whereas the 6800 XT got 106.3 at 1440 and 57.4 at 4K. So almost hitting on those 60 frames. 4K. Everything is ultra in this test because we are benching. In the X12, the results were a bit better. Radeon 773 at 1440 and 35.1 at 4K, and the 6800 XT 107.4 at 1440 and 57.7 at 4K. So as you can see, a bit better, but still not ideal. Again, the X11 Apex Legends, which is really popular. The Radeon 7 got 116 FPS at 1440p and 69 FPS at 4K. So again, fantastic performance, but get ready. The 6800 XT gets 211 FPS at 1440p and 124.8 FPS at 4K, which is ridiculous. I tested on the firing range. Then we have again the X11, another good performer, Ace Combat 7, Radeon 7, 1440p, 147.9 FPS, 4K, 70.1 FPS. But then again, the 1600 XT gets 253.7 FPS at 1440 and 133.4 FPS at 4K. As you can see, it's getting closer to that 144 Hz at 4K in some games and 240 Hz at 1440. As for Death Stranding, which has gone really popular, Radeon 7 again really good at 1440. It did 85.6 FPS, and at 4K it did 59 basically. And the 1600 XT did 128.3 at 1440 and 95.2 at 4K, which is pretty much in the ballpark of what all reviewers have been getting at. Now for more awesome performance, Doom Eternal, I tested UAC Atlantica, one of the new levels on the Ancient Gods DLC Part 1. And so at 1440p, which is really demanding, as it has a ton of enemies, the Radeon 7 got 129 FPS at 1440p and 78.2 FPS at 4K, whereas the 1600 XT got 228.2 1440 and 134 FPS at 4K. So again, amazing and getting close to that 144 Hz experience at 4K. Again, talking about id Software shooters, I'm going to talk about Quick Champions, which is my pick, by the way. Doom Eternal was on Vulkan, the Vulkan API. Quick Champions is on the X11, and so I tested some runs on Blood Covenant, the map alone on a custom game. At 1440, the Radeon 7 does super good. It has 136.4 FPS at 1440p and 84.6 FPS at 4K, whereas the 6800 XT gets 254.1 FPS at 1440 and 134.5 FPS at 4K, which again for me is amazing. This is a 1440p 144 Hz refresh, and so I used visual super resolution on the Radeon settings to improve it. But I'm thinking that I might have to get an ultra wide or a 240 Hz monitor because this card just spits frames. By the way, all of this has been tested with my PC, which has a Ryzen 7 3700X and 32 gigabytes of DDR4 at 3600 MHz. Again, I did Borderlands 3, which is very demanding, but I did again both resolutions, and I did the X11 and the X12. So first for the X11, the Radeon 7 at 1440p, everything badass, maximum settings, 57.5 FPS at 1440 and 33.1 FPS at 4K. The 6800 XT gets 89 FPS at 1440 and 52 FPS at 4K. So not great, but the X12 performs much better for both cards. Radeon 7 does 62.9 FPS at 1440 and 34.1 FPS at 4K. Whereas the 6800 XT does 111.1 FPS at 1440, so over 20 extra, and 63.6 FPS at 4K. So it pushes it over 60 FPS, and it pushes it over 100 in the respective resolutions. Then for Yakuza Kiwami 2, which is on the X11, I did a stroll through Sotenbori, the second town in the game. Radeon 7 gets 90.5 FPS at 1440p and 43.4 FPS at 4K, whereas the 1600 XT gets 145 FPS at 1440 and 68 FPS at 4K. All the minimums and maximums are on the spreadsheet that I will share with you, and also I will put it on screen, so don't worry about it. Red Dead Redemption 2, I tested both with Vulkan and the X12. Again, both resolutions, so a ton of runs, pretty annoying actually to get through. Radeon 7, 1440p Vulkan, everything ultra, maxed. 57.7 FPS at 1440 and 37.9 at 4K. 6800 XT, 116.2 at 1440 and 60 at 4K. When it comes to the X12, the Radeon 7 does 58.85 FPS at 1440 and 37.8 at 4K, whereas the 6800 XT does 79.5 at 1440 and 52.33 at 4K. So I'm feeling Vulkan for this game. Then I tested Godfall, which is broken because the 4K results and the 1440p results are basically the same. So I'm just going to take the 1440p results. The Radeon 7 got 60.3 FPS on epic settings at 1440p, and the 6800 XT got 95.7 FPS. And so I compiled all of this to not have to say percentages for every game. We have all the DX11 results, all the DX12 results, and all the Vulkan results. When it comes to DX11 at 1440p, the 6800 XT is 64.2% faster on average, comparing all of these results in games. And at 4K, it's 61.26% faster, which means that as it has a lot less theoretical bandwidth, at 4K the HBM2 on this Radeon 7 helps a bit, because Infinity Cache can do everything. On the X12 1440, it was only 50.67% faster, whereas at 4K it was 61.52% faster. And then on Vulkan, with for example the Red Dead Redemption and the Doom results, at 1440p it was 84.42% faster at 1440 and 67.14% faster at 4K. So results really good. 6800 XT really quick. It's done like 172 FPS average at 1440 and 97 FPS average at 4K. For Vulkan, 186 at 1440 and 99.7 at DX11, and 128 at 1440 and 87.5 on average on DX12. So adding everything, I know it's a lot of numbers, I know it's ridiculous and boring. Adding everything on all APIs, the 1440p results on average are 62.82% faster. And remember, this is stock. We're going to go into a bit of overclocking in a bit. 62.82% faster at 1440p, which is actually a lot, and 62.19% faster at 4K. So it's over twice as much of an upgrade than the Radeon 7 was over the Vega 64. Okay, and now we're gonna go for the last section of this review, which is undervolting and overclocking. This is not Vega. I mean, the power consumption is completely under control. It boosts, the GPU boosts to like generally 22 to 23 in the 22 to 2300 range for the core clock, and it uses right around 250 FPS for watts for the core, so around 300 for the entire thing with the memory and everything, which is right on point with its TDP rating. But with that being said, I have maintained the exact same performance with an undervolting profile that I will share right now on screen. I got it down to 1000 millivolts at 1 volt. I could go lower, but I just left it at 1 volt, and I dropped, I just put Unity in Heaven on the background while I was doing this for stability, and it hasn't been unstable in any game. So at 1000 millivolts, which at stock it's 1150, it goes down to 197 watts on average for the core, so more than 50% watts being shaved off for no performance loss. And then for the overclocking, the juice, I didn't do much because for some reason the first attempt were not stable. Well, they were stable, but the actual results were lower. So what we did is some synthetics. We did all the 3D Mark stuff. Fire Strike, normal, extreme at 1440 and ultra at 4K. So first off, Fire Strike 1080p, Radeon 7, baseline performance, okay, 28,000, 70 points, and with the overclock that I had, 31,462. For reference, reference 2080 Ti out of the box did 34K. So 6800 XT out of the box does 49,336 points. For reference, that's about 1,000 points more than an RTX 3090, because I said nothing about the NVIDIA thus far. Then rage mode does nothing, just 200 points extra, 49,577. Then I added the 15% power limit, which I hope it was more, for 50,400. Then I overclocked the memory by 100 MHz, which is 50,765, and then I overclocked the core by about 200 MHz, and I led the memory at 2150, which gave me 52,100 points. So all in all, it's lower than we'll see now for the games. It's like 7 to 8%, but as this is 1080p, as we go up it'll be better. At 1440p, Radeon 7 had 13,490 points. The 6800 XT out of the box did 24,908 points, and with the overclock I did 27,229. So 10%, give or take, 10%, which is really good. And I can go further. This is just the first one that has worked. I don't know the limits of my chip yet, but it's fun. 4K, Radeon 7, 6,880. This is Fire Strike Ultra. 6800 XT, 12,452. With the overclock, it does 13,726, which is amazing. Then times by the Radeon 7. This is really interesting. Radeon 7 only does 7,883, while the 6800 XT does 17,200, which is over double. And then with the overclock, we get to 19,038 points, which is really good, and beating the Ampere cards actually. And then I have one ray tracing result, just one, which is Port Royal. It has 8,842 points out of the box, and 9,834 points with the overclock. For reference, for example, 2080 Ti was right around 8,000 out of the box, and 3080 is like 11,400, 11,500 out of the box. So it's like in between. So, and considering that Port Royal is tailored for the NVIDIA architectures, these are really good results. And I think as more games get optimized for the AMD architecture, it'll be better. So this was the review. As you saw, the card is really fast. I'm super happy with it. Price to performance is really good. I would get this over a 3080, mainly because game performance is pretty much the same and you're getting more VRAM. I haven't talked about it much, but most of the games that I've been testing, especially at 4K, we're allocating 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12 gigabytes of VRAM depending on the situation. So we've seen, for example, that the 3070 with its 8 gigabytes gets 6 FPS at 4K with Cyberpunk with ray tracing, so without DLSS. So I'd say this is a really good card for gamers, and I'm going to keep testing and keep not here, but on other places. I'll keep uploading more results. If you want to talk to me, you've got all the channels in here, and we'll see each other soon. See ya.